back a year ago.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound podcast. Very excited to be joined today by Brent Dawson. Brent is embarking upon a project called the Texas Beer Run. The premise is simple: to visit every independent brewery in the state of Texas. Very excited to learn more about Brent's story and his exciting adventure. So without further ado, we welcome Brent to the Beer Bound podcast. Hi, Brent.
Hey, how's it going?
Great.
Pretty good. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Brent, we kept the intro nice, short, and sweet for you.
Yeah.
So can you get into a little bit more? Who are you? Your passion affiliated with beer? Can you give us a little bit of your background?
I am just a beer enthusiast. I like I like to drink it. That's my background. A friend of mine and I started a website about a year and a half ago called Best Beer Near Me. The idea behind that was he used to be in marketing and sales and would travel a lot. And so he would post up in Portland or something and call me, what beer should I try in Portland? And I would just rattle off, you should go to Wayfinder, you should go to Grains of Wrath, you should go to Breakside, and it became a thing. Every town he was at, he would just text me or call me, which brewery should I hit? And then I would just tell him. And so we decided, well, there ought to be a way to kind of monetize that. So we kind of created this website called Best Beer Near Me. So you could just kind of go to our site, look up the city that you're in and find out what beers or breweries you might want to try.
Is that only for the United States or is that international?
Right now it's the United States. I haven't gotten beyond the borders yet.
Okay, so it's fair to say you've done a little bit of traveling across your country, experimenting the different craft beer scenes. Has that kind of always been something that you've sort of focused on in terms of combining, making the most, I guess you could say, of a travel opportunity to visit some craft breweries?
It's seldom that we'll go on a vacation that doesn't have a brewery presence there that we're going to. And thank God I have a supportive wife who enjoys doing it as much as I do. So a lot of our vacations are centered around who has a really cool brewery that we'd like to go see. And that's taken us to some pretty cool places across the United States. So yeah, that's kind of how it started for us.
Brent, go back in time. Why is beer a significant part of your life? Where did that begin and how did that initiate? How did that come to be?
Because I grew up in a very conservative, religious, dogmatic kind of childhood that alcoholic beverages were a no-no. And so it was something I didn't have a lot of exposure to. And then I went to college and had a couple and liked it. I graduated college back 90s, so it was just imports and stuff like that. I was starting to get into like Chimay and Pilsner, Kel, and things like that. So that's where it started, I guess. And I didn't think a whole lot about it. And then as the craft beer scene started to emerge more and more in the early to mid 2000s, when Untapped first came out, a friend of mine exposed me to it. And so we had this contest, and there was like a group of like 6 or 7 of us, and it was going to be the first person to get to 50 beers on Untapped would win something. And I won in a landslide. So that kind of launched my curiosity for all the different styles and all the kind of different things that craft brewers were doing back then. And it stuck ever since, I guess.
To get started, you just can't stop. I feel like Andy and I could probably relate to that very easily. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Was there anything maybe, I guess, like you said, when you were growing up, beer wasn't maybe a huge thing. You hit college. Is there anything maybe from that point in time where you started drinking to where you started drinking craft beer, and maybe to where you are now that you maybe something that sort of stood out as you've gone down the rabbit hole of beer now? Anything that's maybe stood out that's changed the most?
Let me see if I understand your question. What's changed in beer, or what's changed for me personally?
Maybe how you experience beer.
Well, back yeah, my first experience is it something I'm not supposed to be doing, and I could get in really bad trouble and go to hell or something. And so, so it was a kind of fear-based and done in the closet back then. As I've, grown and thought for myself, I just always enjoyed as a beverage option. Probably, and back then, beers tasted like beer. But as craft beer became more of a thing, there were a whole rainbow of flavors and textures and things that I hadn't been exposed to that were really interesting. Sours, when I first had one of those, blew my mind. At first I didn't know what to think of it, and then there was something about it I just couldn't stop drinking them. I just thought this is really cool. So I guess understanding that the palette of beer is really limitless, that it's a blank canvas, really. I really appreciate those who do traditional styles really well. And I love those who experiment and come up with something I hadn't thought of or experienced or perfected something that is really special.
Brent, can I go back? You said something
Yes.
that's interesting to me. You said you grew up in a very religious household and that alcohol was sort of frowned upon, to say the least, probably
Right.
was disallowed in
Mhm.
in your upbringing. So did you have any issues with that, eventually consuming alcohol later in your late adolescence or early adulthood? Did that bother you in any way? Did you feel guilty about that? I'm kind of thinking back. We had an episode. We had a
Mhm.
professor who actually, he's a professor in Waco, Texas, actually.
Oh, cool.
Dr. Michael P. Foley. He's a professor in theology, and
Oh,
he wrote a
nice.
book. He wrote a book called Drinking with the Saints, and he kind of analyzed all the Catholic saints and associated the best type of drink to have with that saint. So Saint Andrew, for example, we talked
Yeah.
about him, and he's the patron saint of Russia and the patron saint of Scotland. So he would
Mhm.
like maybe a bit more vodka or something like that. I'm not analyzing. He went
Right.
much more further into depths with that. But how do you, I guess his take on it was that in Christian faith anyway, this isn't
Mhm.
true amongst all religions. Like in the Islamic faith, alcohol is not allowed, but in the Christian faith, there, it seems like his interpretation was the after effects of alcohol, like perhaps the misbehavior or the debaucherous behavior, that is sin. But the
Right.
indulging in a little bit of alcohol, maybe not quite sinful. But I'd
All
like to
right.
know your take on that now, maybe as perhaps a religious person, perhaps maybe not. What's your take on that, and how did you rationalize drinking beer coming from a household that forebode it?
Right. Definitely forebode. Um, wow. That's yeah, there was lots of guilt initially, but that was kind of my day-to-day life anyway. There was always something to be guilty about. That's kind of the tradition I grew up in, is that you try to stay on the straight and narrow and don't do anything wrong. And so guilt was always a huge influencer in 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 how you conducted yourself. So, but as I got older, um, and realized that some of these things just didn't make a lot of sense. Um, that why would God care whether somebody said a word, or if somebody had this to drink or didn't? It seemed like a lot of wasted energy on things that didn't seem all that critical or important. Um, Now, having said that, I began to, instead, what evolved for me is that I didn't just blindly accept a bunch of uh, rules, and I didn't blindly discard them either. I wanted to wrestle with them and see if they made sense to me. And over time, I do recognize that indulging in anything to excess is probably not the healthiest thing to do.
Mhm.
Um, and that there are consequences when you do that with anything. So I tried to have a rational, balanced, thoughtful approach to most things in my life, and so beer was just one of them. I didn't just rationalize a way for me to drink it. I, you know, kind of wrestled with these issues to make sure that I'm not just checking my ability to think for myself at the door, that I'm utilizing that as part of the way I live my life and part of my faith too. From that, I've become more of my own unique identity in this relationship that I have with God, and not just some mindless robot, that I have some investment in this, and that I'm coming to these values because I pursued them, not because I was just taught what those were.
I think it's interesting too. I mean, your state, which city did you grow up in, Brent? In
I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. It's like right in the middle of the Texas Panhandle.
Texas. All right. Is that where you live currently?
No, I live in the DFW area, Dallas Fort Worth, just about 16 miles north of Dallas.
Very nice. Now, Texas gets a reputation for being connected with the Bible Belt in the United States, and having good God-fearing Christians and all across the state. But
Right.
it's funny, we've talked to folks, kind of many international brewery owners and brewers. We spoke with a gentleman who runs a brewery in the Philippines, and I asked him about that too, like the Philippines being a very Catholic nation, being quite by a basic standard, a very religious country. And I asked him, is there some pushback with Filipinos nowadays with drinking alcohol? And he said, no, it's pretty standard status quo for Filipinos. It's a very hot country. There's lots of nice beaches, and a nice crisp lager goes quite well in all activities. So I found that interesting. Texas, like I said, it is maybe more of a Christian state in terms of other ones in the U.S., but it's also, I know for a fact that it's also one of the thriving states in the craft beer scene. So
For sure.
is there a bit of a juxtaposition? Is there a bit of a backlash to any of the craft beer that craft beer industry that goes on in Texas, or do you see it as pretty common? There's not too much prohibitive pushback by Texas.
Well, there has been in some of the more rural and smaller towns, but even those towns are starting to find a way into the beer scene. They recognize that it does great for the economy, and as much as conservatives might want to bitch about Christian values, they do like having money in their pocket, and so it is a good source of boosting the economy. And so I've seen more and more of these rural towns, and Texas is so big, it's like divided into 3 or 4 factions. There's a conservative Dallas Fort Worth area, there's a more extremely liberal Austin, Central Texas kind of area, and Houston is kind of a mix of both, and the suburbs are all conservative. So but once you get into rural Texas, which is there's not a lot of people out there, it is much more conservative and much more of a we go to church every Sunday kind of part of the country. And in those areas, it's slowly coming along more and more. Like Amarillo just got one a couple of years ago, and it's a town that's roughly 200,000-ish now. But the town I was born in, Borger, Texas, which is probably less than 50,000, they have one. And another small town up in Dumas, which is roughly the same size or a little smaller, has one. And so they're starting to pop up more and more in these more conservative pockets.
That's a good point. Also, I know you mentioned that some of the rural towns are just coming into it, but craft breweries these days are maybe a lot different than the stereotypical drinking that happened in the past. So I feel like that might even be a little bit more, let's say, approachable to those communities. And one of the bigger things, Andy and I always talk about this with craft beer, is that they're wholesome communities. Like, they're just really good people, really good-hearted. Want to have a good time and enjoy something together and have a chat. Where community is a big part of any faith, at least any one that I've ever known. So I feel like that could play into it well.
they're all, at least the ones out here are extremely family focused. I bring my entire family out there and we all have a good time. There's things to do that's not just about the beverage. It's about hanging out and having conversations and building community. For Texas, because of the crazy laws that we have here, it's really, the brewery is really our local pub. I mean,
Mhm.
it's that's where we go to hang out and be with each other and talk. And the thing about Texas is that these breweries are very family centered, dog friendly. You can bring your whole family and your dogs and hang out, spend the day, or just have a couple, whatever it is. But it's kind of our spot. It's like, instead of the corner pub, that's where we go.
Yeah, it's great. I love that. I love that about it. I've definitely opted for the brewery apart from the corner pub more often
Right,
than not.
right.
So yeah, you got cornhole and games and
Yeah, for
good
sure.
music and stuff, and there's pop-ups. It's definitely a family thing now for sure.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
nice to see that going on everywhere.
Brent,
yeah, for sure.
you mentioned the crazy laws in Texas. Which ones? What are you referring to?
Texas has the most bizarre laws anyway, and then when you fold alcohol into it, it's a complex web that's impossible to untangle. And I don't know all of it. I couldn't begin to unravel it. But there are silly laws like you couldn't sell any alcoholic beverage on Sunday before 10 o'clock. They had this weird distinction between um, malt liquor and beer. Anything above 4% was considered malt liquor. Anything under 4% was considered beer. And so how you could distribute those was determined on which classification it was. And that just got passed. That just got overturned last year, I think. There's some, trying to open a brewery in Texas is very onerous, and it takes lots of passion and money and will and stick to itiveness, because it's not an easy process. If you talk to any other lawyers in any other state, they don't want to touch Texas because of the complexity of it, and it's just so much involved, which is one of the reasons that Craft Pack was kind of founded, was to have a political action voice at the legislative level, so that these beers that have been, these laws that have been holding Texas independent breweries back, got to be challenged. And slowly over time, they're starting to get things passed, like beer to go just got passed, meaning that any brewery could sell from their brewery and you could take it with you. That wasn't a thing until like a year and a half ago. And so those are the slow victories that we're winning over time. But yeah, it's a very complex state. A lot of it's due to the way that Texas Constitution was written hundreds of years ago, that is so dense and silly, but it's all intricate and you can't untangle it.
Brent, can you tell us a bit more about Craft Pack? This is an organization that you're affiliated with, or that
I'm just
you're
raising money for them because I believe in what they're doing. The Texas Brewers Guild launched a political action committee called Craft Pack, which is a board of directors that kind of funnels money to lobbyists on the Texas legislative level, to try to get some favorable beer laws for independent brewing. When you think about the money spent, like AB InBev spends $18 million by themselves, and Craft Pack spends somewhere, and I don't have the figure correct, but it's somewhere around 450,000 compared to that. So it's an uphill battle for them. So in order to have a voice, it's important that at the legislative level, that independent brewers' voices be understood and heard, and recognize what the obstacles are, because Texas likes to brag that it's big in supporting small business, but when it comes down to it, big corporations like AB InBev are the ones who are funding a lot of the campaigns. And so it's really about who's putting money in your pocket. And so they have the most influence in terms of distribution, in terms of tap handles at local brew pubs, in terms of space at the supermarket. They have a lot more influence over how those things get disseminated.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to
Big
it's
beer.
hard to get that AB InBev out of out of the
Out of
market in
anything?
any ways. Yeah. It
It's
just
everywhere.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, okay. Let's talk a little bit about your project, Brent,
Sure.
your Texas beer run. What initiated this interest? I know we sort of touched on you making the most of whatever travel plans you have, you and a buddy of yours, I think, creating this
Yeah.
website. So when did the Texas beer run, when did that start? And was there a motivating force towards this particular project? And how far have you gotten? When did you start? And go ahead. The
Yeah.
floor is yours.
Yeah, I started, well, let's back up. It's not entirely that it's not self-serving. Part of this is I want to bring attention to my website, and having this kind of crusade that people are checking in on quite often helps bring attention to our website. And then I wanted to attach something that was I thought if I could attach some kind of charity to it, that might get more exposure. And then I decided, well, what charities do I care a lot about? And as I was researching it, I came across, I wanted to look what's the best way to support independent brewers. And that's where I found Craft Pack. And so I was able to speak with several of the people there, kind of get their philosophy and what they're after. And so I wanted to attach what I was doing to that. So, as I go to these breweries, I always let people know through my Instagram page where I'm going to be, when I'm going to be there. Donate $5 to Craft Pack through my little link, and I'll buy your first beer. So that's kind of been the thing. So if they donate to that, I'd take care of the first beer. And it's kind of been fun to meet new people that way, kind of talk about my website, and also talk about the Texas beer laws, because most people have no idea. They just show up and have a good time. But the owner of the brewery sure would like people to understand why it's important that they buy his product over one they can get at the grocery store. So as we started that, I started back in July. I don't know if you're familiar with the brewery Jester King in Austin, but they have my favorite beer that they release like around July the 15th every year. So that's where I launched the Texas beer run. And so I went to that release party, and that's where it started. And so since July 15th to today, I've been on the crusade. So
Good stuff. So how many are you at? Like, did you have a target list? And where are you at right now?
right now I am right at around 80 breweries since July 15th.
Nice.
So it's fun. I'm getting to go to parts of the state that I've never been to. That's kind of interesting. A lot of the breweries are kind of centralized in the big cities, so
Right.
it takes several trips to those cities to get those knocked out of the way. I think Austin by itself is over 100 and something breweries, so
Wow.
it's that whole area is just dense, and so it takes takes lots of trips to knock that out. And then you'll have parts of the country where it's 4-hour drive for one or two breweries along the way. So
right. Do you try and hit multiple stops in a day, or is it usually just once every day? Or
well, if I'm in a big city, yeah, I'm trying to clip them off as many as I can
handle.
handle, and then after a while you don't want everything to just taste the same. I'm trying to give information about these places too, so I don't want to just like kill my palate by going to too many. I want to be able to, give an honest review of what I'm drinking.
Yeah, fair. Obviously, definitely want it to be genuine. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So with some of these breweries, like I imagine your crusade, which I love that you call it a crusade, is as it picks up steam. Are some of the breweries getting on board with maybe some of their charity work or some of your social media presence, anything like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had some big showings at Martin House here in Fort Worth. I think there was $250 worth of donations made there. I was just at Shannon Brewing up in Keller, Texas, and I didn't get the final numbers on that, but they were promoting it, and there were lots of donations coming in there. Plus, we leave the QR code so people can continue to donate. And so, yeah, it's catching steam with a lot of these places. I'm having breweries reaching out saying, "Hey, we want to host you. Come
Oh,
on
excellent.
out."
That's
And
great.
so, it's turned into kind of a fun thing, and it's bringing some awareness to things like that. And I get to talk to brewers about what's important to them.
Mhm.
What do they need changed in terms of operating their business.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like a win-win-win. That's great.
Yeah.
Brent, maybe you mentioned this, you said you've been to about 80.
Mhm.
Do you know the final number? Do you know how many breweries exist in Texas?
Well, if you ask me tomorrow, it'll be a different number than today because they ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Last I looked, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 368,
Wow.
I think.
Wow.
So it's one of the more dense states as far as numbers of breweries. But per capita, it's not, because it's a lot of people in Texas, and it's spread out way all over. So it has a significant, maybe fourth or fifth in terms of numbers for a state, but if you look at the amount of people, it's not that many breweries comparatively.
Now, you mentioned, obviously, this is a big trend, probably
Right.
nationwide, in terms of having a higher concentration of breweries in urban settings. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Have you found, I suspect you've probably hit a lot of the Dallas Fort Worth breweries.
Yes,
That's maybe you've knocked off all of them or most of them?
almost all of them. I'm down to a handful. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Have you found any like difference, particularly in, I don't know if you've been to Austin yet, but I
Oh yeah,
suspect
yeah.
maybe, yeah, I suspect the brewing scene, just, you mentioned it being quite a more liberal city in
Hmm.
relation, in comparison with a place like Dallas. So did you find any interesting uniqueness between the cultures of those cities, maybe with the culture that exists in a small, more rural area? Or you mentioned the classic tropes of being family friendly, being dog
Hmm.
friendly, being warm and inviting. Do those sort of vibes and patterns persist throughout all rural and urban settings, or are there some differences?
The family friendly and dog friendly is pretty consistent everywhere, but each community has its own personality. Austin, for a lot of reasons, I mean, it's a very liberal city. So in addition to the family friendliness, the dog friendliness, there's lots of progressive support there too. There's like ABGB had uh, like this transgender friendly kind of concert that was going on there that kids from the community were performing at. And so, just in the, on the heels of what happened in Colorado, ABGB was doing that for a while. And lots of Austin breweries are kind of like that. They have this kind of liberal sensibility about themselves, this progressive sensibility, and it's shared by most of the city. And so that's something that's embraced there. But if you go to Dallas, you won't see that kind of thing. You'll see just more of your traditional family hangout. It's the conversation tends to be much more on the right side of the political spectrum, which is fine. It's another place where like-minded people can hang and talk about whatever. But yeah, those are some of the subtle differences. And then if you look at just the beer, um, in Austin, it's it's a hot city. I mean, it's an outdoor city most of the time. So a lot of the beers are lower ABVs. Uh, I look at Jester King, who does a lot of lambics, Belgian farmhouse style ales. So they're on the lower end and more crisp and refreshing and dry. ABGB is very lager centered pilsners on the lower ABV side, and a lot of Austin is that way. It's A, because of the weather, I think, and then B, traditionally, Central Texas became populated with lots of Czech and German immigrants back in the 1840s, 50s, and so lagers and lagers became a more prominent thing that kind of spread out through the rest of the state, but it kind of emerged there. So you'll see these influences along with the food in Austin. You'll have lots of German style sausages and things like, and Mexican influences in the food and in the beers that you drink. And then barbecue is huge in that part of the country. So you can see the evolution of the cuisine and the beers that kind of go and support that cuisine.
Yeah. Now, Brent, how are you recording or documenting your sojourn? Because Garrett and I, we do a small periodic beer travel series.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's a side project of ours, and we definitely appreciate the excuse to venture to some different location in order to try the wealth of beer and imbibe in the culture in that perspective. So I just I know you have an Instagram page. That's where we first connected. So I think you post there, but I think, do you do any other documentation, content creation? How do you record your crusade?
Yeah, most of the actual crusade itself is documented through my Instagram page, but I do more full feature articles on bestbeernearme.com when there's something really interesting, or there's an experience I had at one of the breweries that I need to talk about. So some of the more in-depth stuff will be on the website, but some of the, quick beer ratings, brewery ratings are right there in my stories. I mean, you can just follow along. And so that's where I do most of the documentation. Of course, Untapped is how I kind of look back and remember what it was I had and what I thought when I had it. So
Great for tracking.
yeah, for sure.
I was going to ask you about some of the articles on your website. It was, going through a number of them, obviously, to check it all out. And the topics are really interesting. So I guess from what you're saying, it's just, if something comes along that's very niche or new, or you think would be really nice to talk about. Do you ever maybe research topics to do specifically, or is it maybe just a little bit more ad hoc?
Yeah, there's sometimes we'll research what, SEO kind of drives a lot of what most web-based businesses write about. So there's some exploration of what people are Googling. I tend to not like to write that way. If an article needs to be written about that, I kind of farm it out to somebody else. I'm more interested in writing about the places I've been, the experiences I've had, the brewers I talked to, the trips I've been on. Those are a little more fascinating to me. I like a little more human, engagement with the people, and try to capture what the vibe is actually like if you go there. So
For sure. A little taste of what you might experience there, which is
Right.
good. That's good.
Mhm.
I wanted to mention that I was just going through your the article on beer flights, because we always get questions on that, especially on our tours. Like, what should you do for a beer flight? Where do you start, et cetera? So I thought it was a great starting point for someone who's maybe never had one. And
Right.
even the fact that you mentioned vertical beer flights, which is like, let's say, a whole nother level. It's also a
Right.
really cool idea. So I like that you added that anyways. I wanted to let you know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think vertical flights are the coolest. That's a way to. In fact, I'm going to be doing one this Saturday with a brewery here in town. It's they're kind of known for their bourbon barrel temptress, which is a milk stout that they've aged in several different bourbon barrels. And so having a vertical of all 10 is going to be kind of cool because they've changed the spirit that's been in each of those. So
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to recapturing that moment again.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome experience. All the little
Yeah.
nuances of it, especially
Right.
with barrel aged stuff. Yeah, really
Yeah.
cool. We gotta do that, Andy. We gotta get a vertical flight going.
Oh yeah, it's the coolest.
Why, Garrett? Why haven't we?
A good question. We should be doing this all the time.
I agree. Brent, what is it about the written word that you seem to be quite good at? You obviously devoted writing a blog to your passion for beer and craft beer. I think
Mhm.
Garrett and we struggle, I think, with a lot of we don't make that much written content. I think we're more presenters a little bit. I think we lean a bit more to stuff like a podcast or video content in terms of writing.
Yeah.
Get a
Although,
spurt.
yeah, I'm not saying we're not anti-writing. we
Right.
I mean,
We got
we
into
have
it pretty
to.
hard for a little bit, and then it was just kind of like,
Yeah, I know. I mean, we have to write the little introductions for these
Mhm.
podcasts and things, which take a little bit of time. But what is it, Brent, about writing? Do you have a background in that? Is that another, perhaps a passion of yours that you've combined with it, or combined with beer? Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. I learned to kind of love words from my mom. She was really a terrific letter writer. You know, she would one of her favorite ways of communicating was writing it all out in a letter and giving it to you. And sometimes those were uplifting, and sometimes those were life lessons. And but the way she wrote them, it was poetic. It was there was a music to it that I always was drawn to. Um, and I was always involved in the arts in some way. So writing music or being in bands and things like that was something that I was drawn to. I had a bachelor's in theater, so I was always very interested in plays and the way they were structured and written. Um, and I always just wrote. Um, I always had some positive feedback, um, just writing essays and such at school and things like that. And so I always kind of wrote some things and gave it to friends, or I would have a blog going on and people could rally around that. I used to have a poetry email chain that I would send my stuff out to. Um, I just always enjoyed I don't know, the way words can evoke emotion, can evoke thought, can challenge your thinking. And so while I've had to drift away from it more because the the web has become more visually stimulated and focused these days, I still have a connection with it and won't give it up. I enjoy the writing process, and I want to take people uh, on a thoughtful journey through some of the places I've been.
And now, is it your process do you typically write one blog post per brewery that you go to, or not necessarily? That's not the pattern.
Not necessarily. That could turn into a bunch of the same thing. If something strikes me at the places that I've been, then yeah, I'm going to write about that because I want people to, I want them to feel what it was that or experience what it was that I felt when I was there. And so, and I want these places to be exposed. I want people to know that this is a great place. This place needs to be supported. If it's not, it could disappear. And so, when places like that pop up, I have a reaction to it. Those are the places I like to write about and invite people to.
Can you think of anyone in particular offhand, a brewery that you visited or a piece that you posted that really stuck out to you? It could have been connected with the beer that was produced there, but not necessarily. It could have something to do with the community or something. Is there a location that has really stuck out to you?
There's a lot. Like, I'm reminded of Oak Island's brewery here in the Dallas area. Just I got to sit down with the brewers and talk to them for, gosh, they gave me 2 hours. I mean, they just kept spilling information, and this was right on the the downside of the pandemic. So it was great to hear from those guys and the passion and the energy they had for their brewery. And it's so community centric. It's so connected to Lake Highlands and the people that live there. And just talking to them, you couldn't help but feel like you were part of the family after a while. It was such a neat conversation I got to have with them. And I always try to go out and support. And every time you go out there, it's always a good time. I mean, there's always something going on that you want to be a part of. It's just so whether it's barbecues out in the parking lot, whether it's dog shows or wrestling or something. There's always something going on out there that you want to be a part of, and it's fun, and you have laughs, and you leave feeling better than when you got there. So I think of places like that. And then I think of places like Acapon Brewing in Dripping Springs that I found by accident on this trip. And it's just this little old English style pub setup that they serve cask ale from off of a hand pump. And they take the time to do it right. I mean, you'll have just English mild off of the cask, and it is mind-blowing how good it is. And I hadn't had it that way before. And so, I mean, I've had milds and I've had bitters in lots of places, but to have it done right, taking the love and the passion to serve it traditionally, and making sure that it was conditioned correctly, it was mind-blowing. It was amazing. And without this tour, this crusade, I never would have found that place. And it is amazing. It is so I think of that. I think of Jester King, which is where kind of my love for it kind of all started. It's so esoteric and hippie-ish, and it's part hippie commune, it's part farm, it's part brewery, it's part restaurant, and it's got such space and beauty out there in the Texas hill country, and you can hang out there all day and just take it easy and sip some of the most world-class beer you've ever had in your life. It is such a unique experience. So it's hard to pinpoint one of those things. A lot of those things come to mind as you ask me that question. It's such I feel connected to those experiences.
Brent, from your website and your blog, you've explored outside of Texas, all over the United States. Is there anything, you mentioned some facets like the combination of food, obviously barbecue being a great addition to beer in Texas, where it wouldn't be, say, in maybe in Maine or Vermont or something. But is there anything that you see as particularly paramount for craft beer in Texas that is only synonymous with the Lone Star State and nowhere else in the US?
Wow. Let me think about that. It's interesting. I think, and this is probably true for everywhere, most of these breweries take on the personality of the brewer. And most of them are home brewers. So I know a lot of them start off with these ideals about this is what I'm brewing and this is what my intention is and this is what my values are. And then some of that goes by the wayside as soon as the crowd wants a hazy. And so all of them eventually come back to the center in some way. But each of the breweries have a unique personality that's kind of connected with the brewer themselves. And so it's hard to find something that's just distinct to Texas other than it's as unique as the community it comes from. I really appreciate those who have found a way to do whatever it is that they do as good as they can possibly do it. I mean, I've been to places where the quality of the beer wasn't as important as just the experience at the brewery, and that's fine too. But I really appreciate the places that really take the time to execute whatever it is that they're doing really, really well. And those are the ones that typically I feel a sense of time and place with. I can recall it. It makes me want to go back. The experience is kind of underscored because the beer has been executed in such a thoughtful way.
Sure. Got to have, ideally you shoot for like the healthy balance, right? You got something,
Right.
it's your passion project, but at the same time still, you still got viable income coming in where you might need to
Right.
sacrifice and make a hazy or
Right.
maybe dedicate a little more space in the tap room. I feel
Right.
like that's been, a point of conversation for a lot of the brewers that we talk to. And some of them are like, diehard purists. Is like, no, hazy, I don't want it. It's not being brewed.
Right.
But they still find a way to make it, right. It's like catering to your audience. And maybe that's
Right.
exactly to your point, Brent, just sort of products of the community that they come from. And if
Right.
they're embracing the community and they get on board with what the brewer is doing, and it's what, that's the goal, then they're going to enjoy it just as much as well. So yeah, I could
Right.
certainly relate to that.
Yeah, I think this is a wheat and chaff thing too. There are a lot of people who want to open breweries. Not everybody is at a world-class level. Some are okay, and those tend to fade out. And then there are some who are just incredible business people and marketers who can structure a place to go to that's really fun, and the beers are okay, and they will survive for a little bit, but eventually that doesn't get talked about as much. It's the ones who can do both, the ones who know how to execute their plan, stay true to who they are. I really I love the places where I can tell who the brewer is by drinking the beer and sitting in their establishment. That you can really feel a sense of connection with them. If I'm just going into Chili's, I don't have that same reaction. I can go, if I've gone to one Chili's, I've gone to all Chili's.
Yeah, that's fair.
I can have a good time there, but I'm not going to remember the experience as much.
That's true. So has that ever been in your cards, wanting to open up a brewery of your own, perhaps?
It's been in discussion. Maybe when I retire and have a little more time on my hands to make that happen, that would be kind of cool. And if I stumble across a boatload of cash where I can make it make sense.
Brent, I don't know. Have we even asked? Like, are you an avid home brewer yourself? Do you like to make beer?
I have never tried. I don't have the space. I would love to, but I haven't had the space or the time more than anything to be able to do it. Once I retire and settle down a little bit, I hope to put my toe in the water as far as that goes. I know what it is that I like to drink. I know what good beer tastes like, and it would be kind of fun to see if I could to approximate that in some way.
It would be good.
I think that's on our list too.
Yeah, I know. We talk the talk a lot, but unfortunately we have yet to fully walk the walk. So we got, but I think that's also what, to your point, Brent, it's a function of space and time and things like that, right?
Yeah, it's not a job for somebody who doesn't have lots of time on their hands, lots of room, and lots of cleaning supplies.
It's 90% cleaning.
Right.
Yeah,
eventually we'll get there.
Yeah, I think Garrett and I, and it sounds like you as well, Brent, like we have such immense, we have such immense, what's the word I'm looking for? Not gratitude, immense.
reverence.
I
Respect.
can't even think of it. Wait, respect. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
obviously such
Right.
an easy word. Yes, such respect for it really is. It is what it the main adjective associated with it. It is a craft, and a lot of
Right.
these
Mhm.
craft brewers have been doing this for decades, and they're real experts at this. So to even
Right.
dip your toes in it, it's such a long haul. It's kind of like,
Right.
do you want to be a basketball player? It's like, well, kind of, but
Right.
I'm
Right.
not going to make it to the NBA or really be able to do very much with this skill, even if I dedicate so much of my time and effort towards it. So it really is a particular craft that
Yeah.
we do have such respect for. So it's hard to just
A
dip
little
your feet in.
narcissistic to think that I
Can
can.
be.
Yeah, I'm just going to go out in the garage and bust that out. I'm going to make
Yeah.
the next mind-blowing lambic in my garage, and everybody's going to want to have it. Yeah. That is a bit self-aggrandizing to think I could do that, but I sure would like to try sometime.
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
absolutely. Just a shot. Give it a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brent, we're coming up on our hour mark, but we really appreciate your time. It's you're a great conversationalist. This has flown by, of course, but I wanted to ask you. We're really interested. Garrett and I see beer in such an interesting light that you can connect such different parts of the world and associate beer with people, with culture, with history, with science, with technology, with politics, with whatever social sub issue that you want to associate it with. You take beer in a certain way and you have a passion for it and you dedicate a lot of time towards it in terms of your spare time, in creating projects, in advocating for associations that help craft beer in your state. You associate your writing with craft beer. Where do you get the inspiration to do all this? Is it an inspiration to educate? Is it just a passion for your own self-service and just to enhance your own personal life? Do you see that as an act of charity? What is beer in the macro sense to your life, Brent?
Well, yeah, it's a little of all those things. I am an educator. I've been in education since 1996 as a teacher and as a counselor, and so teaching has always been something that I love doing, and it's a part of my everyday life. So I do enjoy educating people about beer. Some people I educate who don't care to be educated, and it's just a boring conversation with me telling them why this beer is awesome. But so yeah, I like finding my people, and so there is a bit of that, and then there's I have such a sense of community with the craft beer scene. I've made friends everywhere I've gone. You can't stand in line at a bottle release without making friends with the people you're in line with. And it's an event. We're all going there. It's like that beer's the rock star. And so we all paid the tickets to get there and have our chance to meet this new bottle of beer. But it's the sense of community that you have in the line and the stories that are told. And I always found that those were so interesting and so much more the reason that I go. I can get the beer. It's being in the line, talking to those people, hearing their enthusiasm for it, and then sharing this beer with them in that vibe, in that setting. It gives you such a sense of place and time that you can't replicate. And so there's that. I always love hanging out with like-minded people and sharing an experience. That's always been important to create the stories, to hear them. If I could be a fly on the wall to hear as many stories as possible, that would be my thing. I enjoy that. I love that. So that's a part of it. And because of that, I'm very invested in the breweries, and I want to see them succeed. And I saw what the pandemic did to them. It wiped out a ton of them. Even today, those who haven't been able to recover because of what the pandemic had done to them. You know, there were like 4 or 5 breweries here in the DFW area that have closed their doors in the last year and a half, because they just couldn't restabilize after that. So it became incredibly important to me to find as many ways as possible to keep their doors open if I can. You know, not only just me going there, but getting the word out about it, and then also having advocates for them at the legislative level that can make their job a little bit easier, because a lot of the obstacles in their way don't have to be there. It's just silly regulations that don't make a lot of sense. And we're Craft Pack's about trying to get common sense laws passed. And so that's became another reason why I do this.
Well,
Great reasons.
very well said. Brent Dawson, thank you very much for your time. bestbeernearme.com, a wonderful plethora of beer related articles and beer information.
Yes.
Definitely encourage everyone to check out this particular website. Brent, I guess as well, probably the best way to follow your Texas beer run is through Instagram. Can you?
Instagram at Best Beer Near Me. In my stories, you'll see everywhere I've been. I'll give a rating to the places that I've been. Also, there's a link to donate if anybody, any of your listeners would like to do that. Also, if you go to our shop and you buy the Best Beer Near Me sweatshirt, all those proceeds go to Craft Pack. So and it's a cool sweatshirt to have. So
No kidding.
All right.
Brent Dawson, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to catching up with you again in the near future. Hopefully you'll have more than 80 breweries under your belt by then.
Oh yeah. Thanks guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Brent.
Take care.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer related content. Remember, craft beer is here.